All right, everybody. Bio Bros, episode 11. This one, we're going to be talking about how to avoid burnout and keep motivation and stuff in the hobby. We were talking about this before, and we see so many getting out of the hobby sales or lost interest and stuff all the time. And I don't think you really necessarily need to. There's some fairly simple things you can do to avoid it and keep interest going forever. Well, maybe not even forever, but a lot longer. It's not as short term, and I feel like people make a few of the same mistakes too that discourage them from staying into the hobby. I know Alex can attest to that too. Like, he's definitely had a fish tank crash, and I've never even asked that before. It's just how it goes, and it is discouraging and kinda makes you wanna get out of it for a second, right?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I've had a couple of things. Not so much get out of the reptile hobby or like the fish hobby, but like a couple things like getting out of the plant hobby. I've definitely had like burnout when it came to plants and things like that, and a little bit with the reptiles and fish, but not as like severe.
Yeah. So for me, we'll just get right into it. I think the number one thing that causes people to burn out is they get in too deep too quick. Like, I see a lot of people go from never having kept an animal to having it be their whole personality for, like, a year, and they're still a newbie at that time. They got in way too much. They didn't necessarily know what they were getting into, and that causes them to burn out, and they don't even necessarily know why. You see those breeders pop up, and it's like, "Dude, you didn't even keep anything, and now you're a breeder of all these out of nowhere?" And then they're gone, and I think they just didn't quite fully understand what was happening.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that happens. Is people either get into the hobby for the wrong reason, or they get into the hobby and just dive headfirst in, and they just get a bunch of stuff where like they go, "Oh, I'm gonna get this and I'm gonna breed it and I'm gonna make money," and then they don't make money and they realize how much work it is and they're like, "Oh, I messed up."
Yeah, they're like, this isn't that fun." And I think that person's perspective would be different if they just got, like, 1 or 2 lizards, right? They didn't try to get their whole garage into this whole breeder thing and redo everything, like, they didn't turn it into a job. They just kept it as a hobby. When you have 50 fish tanks, it's a lot of work in there, scraping algae off of them, doing water changes, getting filters cleaned, feeding the fish, just basic stuff. Now that takes a long time, and it's not as much of just a little hobby and something you enjoy. It's almost a second job you have, and
Yeah,
that's no fun. Like, I can definitely see how that would burn people out because 'cause I've done that before too. Like, I've had way too many animals. I've had way too many tanks. I think my record of running fish tanks was, like, 11 plus, like, 3 or 4 reptiles at least, and that just was too much. None of my tanks looked nice, and I was not as, like, interested in each individual one. It was more of a chore rather than a hobby, and when I downsized, I like it a lot more.
yeah. I think one like a big thing that people run into when like getting burned out in the hobby is they like I said, they get into it for the wrong reason. They're either getting into it to try and make money fast, which doesn't happen, or they're getting into it and then they're getting a whole bunch of animals, and they're animals that they don't even personally have like a love for. They're just the hot animal of the time, or like they're an animal that they're like, oh, this is really popular right now. It must be great. I'm gonna get it, and that will burn you out very quickly. Um, like starting off with beginner animals when you aren't like into the hobby is good, because even the basics, they're there for a reason. They're good to teach you the basics and teach you better care and things like that for your animals. And that's where everyone starts most of the time, and that's why you want to start there. But don't go out and just get all of these animals because you think you're going to make money off of them, or you are like, oh, these are really popular, they must be amazing. No, you need to do your research, look at what animals you have interest in, what kind of setups you have interest in, what you think you might enjoy keeping. Um, And also just keep you can keep a couple of things to learn like a good like maybe one like a beginner snake, beginner lizard, beginner turtle or whatever, which I wouldn't really say any turtle's really a beginner turtle, but um beginner stuff first and like start off with maybe one, and if you really enjoy that animal, awesome. If you don't, you can sell that specific animal, but it also teaches you that lesson. Well, I might enjoy this more, and then you can get what you would actually enjoy more versus just what's popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I tell people all the time at my jiu-jitsu gym, I'm a coach there and I've been training forever. And when new people come in and they're a little hesitant for class and everything, they're like, "Oh, do I have to sign up right now and do all this?" We're like, "No, we give all of our people a free trial." And what I tell them is, I'm like, soccer wasn't for me. I was a kid. Whenever played some of the sports, none of them were really for me. I tried them out, but then I found jiu-jitsu and I liked it and I've stayed with it kind of forever. And so I'm like, "So jiu-jitsu might not necessarily be for you, but come in, try it out." Same thing with fish keeping and reptiles and all that. It might not be for you. You might think it's kinda interesting, try it out. If it isn't, that's totally fine. Like, just because you got 1 lizard doesn't mean you're a reptile guy for the rest of your life. That's totally fine. But the main people that I think see burnout it in that kinda way are in it for, like, 5-ish years, like, maybe 2 to 5 years, and then they get that burnout. Like, it's something that they could have actually done forever as a hobby and enjoyed for 20 years, but they just got in too deep too fast and just got turned it into a job or turned it into a chore, not something they enjoy. But also on the flip side of that, there's people who don't do enough, I don't think. I think people will go too small and they don't enjoy it because it was almost too boring for them or too insignificant. Like, they don't do a lot of research, they don't really know what they're doing, so their animals tend to have slightly improper care, and they don't really truly care too much, and I think if they went a little bigger and maybe built, like, a nice bioactive vivarium, spent some money, spent some time on it, then they would get more out of it because 'cause they'd see more of the rewards, not necessarily just animal in a box.
Yeah, I feel like some people get to that point of where they almost feel static because like they'll get a ball python or they'll get a leopard gecko and they'll set them up in like the basics, and they'll be happy with it. They'll be excited. They'll be playing with the animal, holding it all the time, things like that. And they'll be like, "This is really cool." And then they don't do anything else though. They don't upgrade the tank. They don't switch maybe to bioactive. They don't do stuff to like better the actual enclosure or the environment for the reptile and stuff. And I feel like then they're just like, okay, I'm bored now. And they don't, but they like you said, they don't do the research to find out what they could do. Because like I feel like there's a lot of people who get like ball pythons and stuff, set them up basically, and then they get bored because it's aspen and eggplants and a hide or two hides and stuff like that. Like it's just this basic thing. Whereas you did your research, you could set up a really cool bioactive enclosure, which would actually not only does it give you more interest in the animal because you're actually doing this and like building these enclosures and stuff like that, but it causes your animal to act more naturally. So they're moving more, they're interacting with the environment more, they're exploring. So like it brings a new life to the animal itself too, because you see them exploring, you see them do it and stuff. They're not just sitting in one spot because they've had the same tank for the past 5 years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because that's a progression I made too. Like, I had a lot of standard tanks, nothing special about them at all, and it was getting kinda boring, and then I started bringing in that naturalistic and bioactive style to my tanks, and I've liked them a lot more. My snake was really boring in his boring tank, understandably. When I moved him into a better tank, he was way more active, and it was way cooler to have him. He was way cooler of a pet. And so I think going in deeper for some people is what you need to do. Like, go for it, go hard into it, and do something different. And that's gonna
Mhm.
bring me to my other thing I think that is helpful too is do something a little different. If you've only ever kept freshwater tanks ever, let's say you have 2 freshwater tanks running, you're a fish guy, you're not don't have a whole fish room, but you're that's your thing. And freshwater's kinda feel like you've done everything. You've done some planted tanks, you had some shrimp for a minute, then you went and got an Oscar and got a bigger fish, and whatever, you kinda ran your cycle. Try out a saltwater tank. Try that out. It's a just enough different that it might actually be your thing. Or if you went way down the reef keeping thing, try freshwater. Try something a little different and change your direction just a tad bit. And I think that keeps everything interesting too.
Yeah, I completely agree, and, like, an example of that would be how you and I have both kept bioactives and stuff like that, but, like, currently, I'm starting a new or getting ready to start a new project where I'm going to build, my Anolis barbatus or, Western bearded anole or Cuban false chameleon, whatever you wanna call them. I'm building an enclosure that's gonna be 2 foot by 2 foot by 3 foot tall, and that's gonna be new for me because 'cause I've never actually built an enclosure itself. But on top of that, I'm not just setting it up bioactive, I'm setting it up as a biotope, which the difference between just bioactive and a biotope means that I'm doing research and uh, finding plants that are like native to where this lizard is come from, native, which with them is Cuba, Western Cuba specifically. So like I'm doing research and figuring out plant species that come from Western Cuba, and then I'm going to then go out and get these plant species and set it up similar to how their environment would be set up in nature. And like I've looked up researched their environment, so like I've seen pictures of how they like where their environment is, how it looks, how it's naturally set, what kind of soils on the ground, things like that. And I'm gonna do it as a biotope, which is in itself a whole new challenge. So it adds that extra excitement. If this is your kind of thing and you're really into it and stuff, the biotope adds a whole another level of excitement to it because you then get to see how this animal interacts with native plants to its area and things like that. And yes, the animal you have has probably never seen any of their native land that they're in, or like where they're from natively, but they still it's ingrained in them to interact with certain plant species and stuff how they would in the wild. Even if they've never seen it before in their life, there's something in their instinct that will tell them how to interact with them when they see them.
Yeah, biotopes are super cool. I wanna do a YouTube video where I make a true biotope. So people toss around biotope, but technically a biotope only has materials that are sourced from the native habitat, would be technically a true biotope, but nobody cares about that. That's just like that's not
Next
true.
to impossible.
Yeah, but I wanna do a true biotope for a Sonoran bark scorpion and actually source all the materials from areas where I find the actual scorpion I end up keeping. I think that'd
Mhm.
be super cool, and that's something I've never done before either, like, that's kinda that pivoting, do something a little different to keep it interesting. I've never really kept arachnids at all, and I've never done a true biotope because that's pretty much impossible unless you live where these animals you're intending on keeping also live. So,
Mhm.
that's that's interesting to me, it's something I think about, something that's on my mind, and I wanna do it, and I think that's kinda cool, and will 100% keep me interested in everything, keep everything going. Um, Another thing I think people get burned out on too is, like, I feel like they spend too much money on nonsense, like, they're kinda victims of marketing, and then they end up thinking that the hobby's a money pit, and it really isn't. Like, they'll buy I see it in reef keeping a lot. People are spending so much money on lights and filters and this and that with all these name brands, and that's just unnecessary. Like, there is buy it nicer, buy it twice, and then there's ultra luxury items, and you don't need all that.
Yeah, I feel like that's more towards like the fish hobby, less so the reptile hobby. And the only reason I say that is because like the reptile hobby, a lot of times it's almost always buy it nice or buy it twice. And even if you don't have to buy it twice, you're then getting less of what it like actually decently worse product. Um, just like how the perfect example, UVB lights. The fixture and the tube for the tube lights and the tube lights themselves are way more expensive than a fixture and a um, twist-in light or coil light. But when you compare them, tube lights actually produce UVB for a good bit and a good distance down. The coil lights, unless your animal is like within 2 inches of the bulb, which is basically impossible inside of an enclosure, they're not getting any UVB. Um, so like the reptile hobby, I feel like it's a little different with that, just because they tend to do less of like, oh look at me, you should buy this because of this, which there is still some of that. Um, but it's not as bad as like the fish hobby, where the fish hobby they do that pretty badly.
Yeah, I see it all the time. Like people need name brands, like they'll pop up, and then this brand's cool for like a couple years, and everybody keeping reefs needs this new wave maker that's $400. And the wave maker I have in my reef tank was like $12 for a 2 pack on Amazon, and that sucker's been running for like 8 years straight, no breaks.
Well, it's like
Uh,
um the lights that I have, or I used for most of my aquariums when I've had them. It was either Beamswork or Night Crew, which are both like small brands. Night Crew has become a bigger brand, but like when I originally got it, it was a small brand, and they're just as good as like the Fluval lights that are 10 times the price, or the um, other LED bar lights that are like way more expensive than, and they've lasted just as long. So it was like, why would I pay $1,000 versus $100?
yeah, that's my 75-gallon freshwater tank was bought off of a guy who was just sick of it. He kind of was telling us, he's like, I'm tired of just paying for this thing. And it was because he bought a lot of gimmick name brand products. And some of them were nice, some of them weren't as nice. Like he bought a Fluval G6 filter, which those were so cool when they first came out, and now you'll never hear about them. It was supposed to be this new like space age canister filter that was just like technology, and it looked like futuristic, had like chrome on it and like a LCD
Hmm.
screen that told you like the temperature of the water, and just nonsense. It was like $700, and I threw it away because it's a piece of junk. That thing's garbage. And the little Eheim filters that aren't cheap, but they're also not ultra expensive. I love those filters. That is my favorite canister filter ever. And same thing on the light. That guy bought a name brand light, and it wasn't any better than the new light I have on there that was like $50. And so that guy just got burned out of paying for this thing when really he was just paying for things that he didn't have to. And that's discouraging. Like when your filter cartridges cost $30 to change out, it starts being not as fun.
Yeah. I
And
definitely agree with that, and um, the same with like certain parts of other hobby, like uh, arachnids. That's a good example. People go out and buy these enclosures that are like the acrylic enclosures, and now this is not a knock against any acrylic enclosures or anything like that, because I still have some of them. Um, because they are good enclosures. They're very good enclosures, but they tend to be way expensive for something you could technically get like a critter keeper for, and it will work. Um, so spending $60 versus spending $5, and it's kind of like, why would I spend all that money I mean, if you want to do it, because like for like the looks, because they are a lot cleaner. They're a lot like they look nicer and things like that. Um, in some people's opinion, and if you're going for the looks, go for it. But if you're just going for functionality, there's no point in spending that kind of money on stuff that aren't like you said. It's no point in spending that kind of money. You're just gonna burn yourself out because you're gonna be like, why am I spending all this money for something that is this when I can get something similar that works just cheaper?
Yeah. Another thing I didn't realize I would really be into, but was plants too. Like getting into plants made my tanks a lot cooler to me.
Hmm.
And I mean, now I even have a whole grow tent full of them. But getting into plants made it a lot more interesting too, because there's more in there and you wanna trim them and do this and that with them nicely, watch how they're growing and all that. Live plants, I'm a big fan of them in tanks, all tanks, freshwater tanks, even saltwater tanks, macroalgae, reptile tanks, amphibians, everything, arachnids. There will be plants you can put in there, and I think that's fun. Like, I really like the plants, adds a slightly different aspect to it, and in some tanks, the plants are almost the main attraction, and the animals are not the main attraction.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. The only thing I would say with that too, with the plants, is like same thing. You can't let yourself get sucked into the marketing because plants are really bad about that. Like best example I can think of right now, Thai constellation, the Monster Deliciosa Thai constellation. Or ever when the big boom happened in like 2020, 2021 of plants, those things were selling for 1,000 plus for a big one, 500 plus for smaller ones. They were still 250 for like a little 2-inch pot. I mean, they were insanely expensive. And everyone's buying them. They're like, "Oh, I got my Tycon. I got my Tycon. I got my Tycon." Um, if you really like a plant, give it time. Because like I've always really liked Tycons. I think they are very pretty. They are a plant that I've always wanted, but I would never allow myself to spend that kind of money. And then this year, I ended up getting two Tycons. And the reason I ended up getting two Tycons is because I got one, which the leaves are already getting variegate or already getting fenestration. The leaves are like the size of a volleyball. Um, I spent $50. Whereas back in 2020 or 2021, that would have been a $500 plus plant. And then the other one that I got was like $20 from Walmart, and it's a very nicely variegated, high variegation plant that again back then would have been $500-$600. But if you just wait, if it's a nice plant that people enjoy that aren't super hard to keep, they tend to go down in price. It's just going to take time, and it's not worth spending thousands of dollars on a plant that in 2 years is going to be worth $20.
Yeah, and a lot of the vivarium plants are really cheap. Like 20 bucks can get you a pretty cool orchid
Oh yeah.
just because it's a niche market. Like not a lot of people have terrariums, right? And you kind of need a terrarium to keep a lot of these plants because that's just kind of what you need unless you happen to live right on the equator pretty much. And so there's not a ton of people buying them, which means there's not a huge demand, so prices aren't too bad on a lot of stuff. That's really cool. So you can have lots of really cool plants in your tanks and not spend a lot of money. And the other thing too is with that small market means that when people have overgrown tanks, they need somewhere to get rid of those cuttings, and usually they need to get rid of them fast so they don't die on them. So if you
Hmm.
stock like groups and Instagram story sales, sorry guys, my fake tooth is still making me mispronounce some words, but stock those social media sites, there will be people getting rid of tons of plants for super cheap just because they have nowhere else to put them. So they're like, well, 20 bucks is better than no dollars. And you'll get a
Yeah,
whole like gallon bag full of stuff.
crop sales. That's what they call them.
Yeah. Um, I did that. I sold one of my buddies, who's local here. I think I charged him $50 and then just cut. I was like, I'm gonna cut a lot of my plants out of here. I saved a couple of ones that I just wanted more of personally. But I was like, whatever I cut, I'll just throw in a bag and you can have it for $50. And we did the math on it, and it was like retail value $150 worth of plants. And I just was like, I have nowhere to put them. They have to get cut. I have to either throw these away or I sell them to you for real cheap.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the easiest ways to get a bunch of plants is just wait till someone's doing a propagation and be like, "Hey, I'll give you $50 for a gallon-sized bag full of your props." Or I'll give you however much, depending on what plants they have. A lot of times you'll get 10 times, they're like 3 to 10 times the worth of what you give them just in cuttings. And yes, you do have to then root them and things like that, but it's still you're gonna get so many that one of them will take root, and that's all you need, really. You really only need one, 'cause then you can propagate it yourself later on.
Yeah, and like we were saying, it's fun because it like we got on that whole tangent because it's like a hobby within a hobby. You know, you're taking care of your frogs and then you're taking care of your plants too. You're taking care of your frogs' plants. Like
Mhm.
you're your frog's gardener. So it's kind of a secondary hobby that keeps some interest going around. You're not just getting burned out doing the same routine every single day. It's pretty neat. Uh, like I love my plants. I did not think I would actually be into plants, and like I said, now I have a grow tent full of them. Spend way too much money on them, and have nothing to do with my animals. Well, for the most part.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, they definitely are a good, like, hobby within the hobby.
and then I'll say probably the last thing that I think of why people burn out too is it's not necessarily burnout as this one, but they get animals for their kids because their kid mentioned they liked snakes one time, which they're just trying to be a good parent, trying to support their kids. I don't blame them for that, but they don't necessarily ensure that their kid is truly interested in it and wants to care for this for the next 10 to 20 years. So they get into it too fast and their kid finds out, I'm not actually a snake guy. I think they're kind of neat, but maybe not in my home. And now they have to get rid of all this stuff that they got, and now they burned out of it. Like the deal
Yeah.
that um, I brought up that Alex had a similar one. Like both of us had to wait before we got higher responsibility animals because we made deals with our parents and proved a level of responsibility and dedication before we were allowed to do that. And I think more
Mhm.
parents should cash in on that. Be like, hey, if you want a snake, snakes are really common ones for kids to want. Actually, I see it all the time because I'm a coach at the jiu-jitsu gym, so I'm around all ages of kids. And they like snakes, which is cool. Big progress. But I think they should parents would be like, all right, how about do this for this long and do it. Or I've heard of some people that say care for a fake one. So they have a fake aquarium of some sort, like a shoebox, and a fake snake in there, and they have to check in and fake feed it and fake clean for it for like a period of time and be like, look, if you can't take care of a fake one, how can I trust you with a living being, right? That animal deserves care just as much as you do. So you have a bit of responsibility, and I like that a lot. And I think that prevents burnout. It
Oh,
kind of is, this hobby is actually not for me. I'm not getting into it. It's a lot more work than I thought it was.
yeah, and I actually have 2 perfect examples, for that. Like, first one, my sister actually had gotten a bearded dragon, and she was all excited, got the tank, got the setup, took care of her and everything, and she just got bored. Didn't want the animal anymore. So I took it. It became my bearded dragon. And then the other example was at the place I currently work at. We had a lady come in and she was like, "Hey, I have a corn snake. I got it for my kid. She loved it and everything, but she's just lost interest. And we ended up at my work taking that snake in, and she gave us a whole 4-foot tank and all of the substrate and like the mice she still had and lights and a heat pad. I mean, it was probably easily $1,000 worth of stuff. And just because her kid got burnt out from it, and she got her kid a snake, and the kid ran lost interest. So I mean, it happens, and that is not something you want to make sure that it's something that it's not a present. It's a this kid is actually really interested and responsible enough to do it. Don't buy them as gifts.
Yeah, and even as an adult, kind of go through that same process. Go, are you still reading about them and researching them a month later? In your free time, are you researching different species just because you think they're interesting and all that? Like, I know, again, it's another thing I haven't directly asked Alex, but I know is true. In his free time, he learns about different species of fish and lizards and spiders and stuff just for fun, just as a thing. Like, oh, I don't know, reading a like old reptiles magazine article about how we used to care for crested geckos just because it's interesting. Because I do that too, and I know Alex does because he has true interest in this. He's been keeping everything for 10 plus years. Like, it's just interesting to me. It's interesting to people who've been in there forever. So do that test with yourself. Like, are you actually interested in this? Does your YouTube recommended look like all fish tanks? If that's the case, probably dedicated, and you're probably like, "Yeah, this is actually for me, not just a quick little thing you're kind of interested in."
Yeah, my YouTube recommended is literally nothing but plants, animals, and video games. So, um, and that like you said, you have to ask, but like that's I do all the time. I will look up videos on how to care for certain things. I'll look up videos on how to set up different um biotopes, not biotopes, but bioactives and stuff. Because I just enjoy watching people set up bioactives. I don't even care what animal's going in there. I like to see it and see how people do it in different ways. And that's another thing you can do is when you're doing these kind of research, you're not like there's not one way to do it. Um, there's a million different ways to do the same thing, and that's why you can do. That's another thing that can like keep you from getting burnt out is doing your research, watching YouTube videos on people doing it in different ways that you never even thought of, and now you have a new way to possibly set up a tank, um, or a new experiment to try, or like it's just something that you can continue. And when you're continuously doing research, continuously watching YouTube videos, reading articles, all that kind of stuff, you find new things to try. You find new things that you will enjoy. You find new species you will enjoy. It keeps you from getting burnt out because you're constantly taking in new information and finding new ways to do things, new species you didn't know about, all that kind of stuff. And it
Yeah,
prevents burnout.
yeah, super neat, and, like, I like to try to do things differently. I try to improve on things, like, um, Alex knows a little bit about this one. The YouTube video will be out soon. I'm gonna try to get it edited this weekend, but I've made, backgrounds, like I've been kinda mentioning before, but I have a technique, to my knowledge, nobody's ever done before to put a finishing layer on a bioactive background specifically for arid animals, and I don't think anyone's ever done it before, and I just was sitting around thinking and thinking and thinking about, like, previous life experiences that I've had working with the materials that I was using, and I was like, I'm gonna try this. I think this could be something cool." And I did, and it was interesting to me and, like, fun and kept it new and fresh, and hopefully, the video will do well and other people will be able to try it out and improve upon what I did even more. So, I like that too, trying to be a little inventive with it. I love seeing people invent things. That's fun. Like, there's a whole, like, engineering side of reptile and fish keeping that's neat too, like, maybe even get into that. People's auto water change systems are always so interesting to me.
Those make my brain explode because I don't understand how they work. They're
Yeah,
just so intricate. It's insane. And like even not even just that, but like also another aspect you can do if it's something you want to do. This is not something you just jump into and go, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna do that because of this." No, it's something you have to enjoy. Something you like if you're working with a species that you really really enjoy and you want to breed them. Doing research for that kind of stuff is also insane because like some species, like the red-eye tree frogs, or even white tree frogs, you can keep them, a male and female, in a tank together for 20 years and have them on a misting system and all that kind of stuff, bioactive, everything, all natural. They'll never breed. You have to do like a rain chamber, which is something completely different. And some species are like that. It's like you have to do a specific thing and you have to do like certain temp drops, certain feedings, more water, less water, all that kind of stuff. It's so intricate. It keeps you interested. And now there are also some species that throw male and female together and you're going to get babies no matter what. Like my giant day geckos. I have a trio, two females and a male. Every now and again, a baby just pops up in the tank and I'm like, oh, gotta save them. Because reptiles do try to eat their own children. Most of the time. But again, is some species are like that, and some species, like I said, you keep them in there forever, and they'll never actually breed with each other unless you meet their specific requirements to get them to breed. And I find that fascinating as well because, like, and like another way to reinvigorate or rejuvenate yourself in the hobby and like not get burnout.
and I thought of one more thing just now while we were recording, and find friends in the hobby. I don't I don't think I would have not been keeping animals without all the friends I've made, but I definitely keep them differently and better, and I'm more into it because of all the friends I've made. And they don't have to be local. Like I've only got one local friend really who's into the same thing at a similar level to me.
Hmm.
Only one local, and I really don't talk to him all that much. But all the rest of my friends are really on the other side of the country, and
Yeah.
it's definitely really cool to hear their perspectives and ideas and things, and if I'm struggling with something, normally they also have, and they're like, "Oh, no, when I had this issue, I did this," and that keeps you from getting down on yourself in the hobby a bit. Like, you're not like, "Oh, I'm terrible fish keeper, this happened," like, you can just instantly ask for advice, and they're your buddies, so they'll help you out, and I think that's really helpful. I think a lot of people not that they feel isolated, but it's hard to figure out what their problems are to even get new ideas because they don't have anyone to talk to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And also it helps with not even like just getting down on yourself, but like if you're like, oh my God, this happened, like my light burnt out or my light burned something or whatever, it burned my favorite plants or something like that. It's someone else who's also probably had that same thing happen and they can empathize with you and be like, yeah, no, that really sucks. Or they can make fun of you and make you feel better about it. Um, but it's having friends in the hobby definitely helps with that too because all of us, like Shaw and I, we are in completely different areas in the country. Shaw, you're in Arizona in the middle of the damn desert. I'm all the way in North Carolina where it's the biodiversity here is insane. Um and but we're both in two completely different areas. So we have completely different experiences when we're dealing with like reptiles and stuff like that cuz like while I don't have to worry as much about humidity, that's more of a struggle for you. Um and it's good to like talk and things like that because even if I have like if all of a sudden weather changes because it is constantly changing and say it stops being as humid here, I might not fully be like, oh, I don't know how to really raise humidity as well. um and then I could talk to you and you would actually have a way better understanding of that because your humidity level is so low. But we also have friends who are further south, further north. I mean, all of our friend group, like that, we have like a group chat on Instagram, and we're from all over the country. Um, and it brings that element of having others who understand what you're trying to do, understand the pain you're going through, or understand the joy you're going through, and then having your back. Like when I found baby day gecko the other day, I posted it in the group chat and I was like, "Look what I found in the surprise today," and everyone was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" And that, everyone was all excited because it was just like it was really cool. And it builds a community, which also helps you keep into the hobby because humans are social creatures. We like being in social situations. So
Mhm.
having other people to talk about the things that you're enjoying in the hobby or the things that you need help with in the hobby, it
Yeah,
helps.
and people in your real life don't necessarily understand, like, your, like, normal group of friends, they don't understand necessarily how cool something is. Like, if I don't have any myself, but uh, if I were to go up to, like, my real friends and be like, "Hey, my, Lygodactys williamsii I bred today, and I got babies for real," they'd be like, "Nice, man, but I don't know what that is." But if I were to say that into this group, everybody would be like, "That's awesome. That's a species that needs more work breeding. Nice job, man. That's super cool." And so you actually get to celebrate your wins with people who understand you. They don't just support you just because they like you. They're like, "Oh, no, that's actually cool."
Yeah, like they have that same sense of like holy cow, and they know exactly what it is, or like how rare it is to breed in the hobby and things like that. So you get that excitement and joy with them. Um, or they even just know how hard it is to breed a certain species. Um, like if I started breeding my Cuban false chameleon, which are in the hobby and they're starting to become way more popular, but they're not as popular as say a crested gecko. But that would be something that would be like it's a new species. It'd be a new species, I think, for everyone in the group chat, which would just it adds an extra bit to it, and it's just really cool. Do I plan on breeding them? Probably not. There's too much things with them that I personally don't want to risk because, like, I've seen a lot of things where like the male just kills the female when breeding and stuff, and I really don't want to take that risk with my animal because I don't. It's just not for me personally because I don't have a. It's not a job for me, so this is just a hobby. I don't want to risk my animal getting killed over a hobby. But that's just not how it is for everybody, but it's another great way to keep not getting burnt out. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, so I think that kinda puts a pretty good wrap on it, on a more wholesome note, make some friends out there. I will say the community of people, I don't put some air quotes around the community because a lot of times I think people associate community just because they have a similar hobby, but that's not always true. Like, there's a lot of people that I don't necessarily agree with or get along with, and that's okay. Just totally fine. But find some real friends, like, message some people who you think are kinda neat and, like, a smaller people like, creators, like, nobody in our group is, like, famous. I think the most anyone has on followers is, like, 5,000, which is, like, 3,000 more than the second most and 1,000 more from that down to, like, 3rd place. Like, none of us are famous by any means or, like, influencers. We're just, like, people who happen to be into the same thing and then, like, somehow or another ran into each other and are now cool. So, just find some people like that, it won't be terrible, and nowadays too, there's a lot of local groups and clubs, and a lot of those people are cool in those. Go to the local fish club and find some people there if you're into fish, like, that's a totally good resource to stay in contact with people who have similar interests to you and keep you going too, just as much as you'll keep them going. Yeah, so I think burnout is something that can most of the time be avoided, and people just have a few reasons for burning out that they don't necessarily they could have avoided, and it will come for you eventually. There will be times where you think about getting rid of everything. I definitely had that when my male bearded dragon died. It was like I'm the worst reptile keeper ever, but that's just not true. Like I got out of that real quick, but I can definitely see how less experienced people would think that it's over and just get rid of everything.
Yeah, I absolutely agree too.
All right, everybody. So we'll call it a wrap there. So that was Bio Bros episode 11. Uh, Tune in next week for another new episode. And remember, like, comment, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Instagrams are linked in the bio. Click on those, give us a follow out there, and we will see you next time.
Y'all have a good night, day, or whenever you're listening to this.